What's up, everybody? Welcome to Heresy Financial. My name is Joe Brown. Recently, a company called Hindenburg Research released a short sellers report on Nikola. Now, this report that they released was a scathing report of Nikola, accusing them of all sorts of fraud. And then Nikola recently just released their rebuttal to that report. And in this rebuttal, it's actually pretty funny. They kind of just admitted to everything, using phrases like, well, we never said that that was our converter, or we never said that it was powering itself driving along that road, and we never said it wasn't just rolling downhill. But what I want to take a look at today is a little bit deeper into the reasons behind why frauds like this happen and what can be done about it. Let's dive in. Now, this may not come as a shock to any of you who have been around my channel for a while, but I believe ultimate responsibility for things like this happening lie at the feet of central banks, specifically in our case, the Federal Reserve. And yes, I 100% think that people and companies who actually perpetrate the fraud they need to be held accountable for their actions. But the environments that provide the fertile ground for these frauds to grow in is created by the Federal Reserve. And here's what I mean. Easy monetary policy creates cheap money. Debt is easy to get. The cost of capital is extremely low, especially for large investors. What that does is it destroys the rate of return on traditionally safe investments, things like cash and bonds. And so for that money to find a place where the return is acceptable, because at this point your return has to be greater than inflation. When you have easy monetary policy, that creates inflation. So you need your return to be greater than the inflation. And so it forces big money to find alternative places to provide a return on its assets. Well, after all of the regular companies in the stock market have been bid up to a price where that money doesn't want to buy those stocks at those prices anymore, it then has to go looking for other ways to get a positive return. So easy monetary policy then pushes all the new money that's being created into ever more speculative investments. And ultimately, the most speculative investments are usually frauds. And so this creates fertile ground for these frauds to grow in, because you have creative thinkers who are smart, but they're also evil. And so they see all of this easy money floating out there that's all looking for a place to get a fantastic return. And that money is much more willing to deploy itself into investments without doing due diligence like it used to, because it's easy to get your hands on money. Money is cheap. And so if you're managing a few $100 million, you need to find a place to deploy that cash as fast as possible, because sitting in cash, you're losing money. You don't have time to sit in cash for a couple of years while you find great investments along the way. And any investments that would have been good, they're priced away by the time you're ready to invest in them. And so it creates the perfect environment for fraudulent companies like Nikola to thrive, because there's tons of money out there wanting to invest in things that can provide a good return over time, and they don't really care about doing due diligence to make sure that it's a company that is doing what they're saying they're doing. Now, this isn't just Nikola. Some of the biggest frauds of the last 100 years have happened during times of easy monetary policy. Think of Theranos. Think of Bernie Madoff. Think of Wirecard, also known as wire fraud. Think of WeWork. Think of Enron. These have all happened in the last few decades, where our Federal Reserve has been extremely easy on its monetary policy and started inflating asset prices by printing money, monetizing debt through quantitative easing, and shoving ever more amounts of money into the system that then has to go chase ever more speculative investments. Even the original Ponzi scheme by Charles Ponzi, he was caught in 1920. If you remember, there was a depression in 1920. It was called the Great Depression at that time because it was the worst recession depression that people had experienced, and that was caused because the monetary policy from the time of the Federal Reserve being created in 1914 up until 1920 created a massive speculation, a massive bubble in the stock market, and it was in that time that Charles Ponzi thrived. And so there are really three takeaways here on things that we could do as a society to prevent things like this from happening, because yes, it's separating wealthy people from their money, but it's also separating poor people from their money, because frauds like this usually attract a lot of money from unsophisticated retail investors just as well as they attract that money from the wealthy. Number one, we need to end central banking. To have an authority with a monopoly on creating money is a power that is too great to not abuse, and they've proven proven for 100 years that the only thing that they'll do with that power is abuse it. And one of the unfortunate side effects of that is these massive frauds that destroy wealth from millions of investors. The second thing is to end fractional reserve banking, which in and of itself is fraud. This is another feature of the system where you have a monopoly on not having to fulfill contracts, not having to fulfill the obligation of a contract that I will hold something of yours in storage, and if you ask for it back, regardless of when you ask for it back, per the terms of the contract, I will fulfill it. Money is actually not held in reserves in the fractional reserve banking system. There's much more money lent out and created through lending than there is held. This perpetuates the system because it's monetary creation. There's an artificial bubble of the amount of money being blown up into the system. And then inevitably banks need to be held to the same standards that everybody else is, which is basically just you have to fulfill your contracts. They should not have a monopoly on fraud, because it then causes other frauds. And then finally, we need to never, ever, ever consider restricting short sellers. Short sellers are by far the most effective tool there is in this world to uncover frauds. Think of Hindenburg Research that just released this massive scathing report against Nikola. They would have never put the time, the money, the energy, and the resources into doing all of this research to figure out if Nikola was solid or a fraud if they didn't have the opportunity to first short the shares of Nikola and then profit off of this. Think of the man hours that it takes to fly people around the world, actually do due diligence, interview people, take pictures, look over the financial reports. That takes real resources. And as a short seller, if you don't have the opportunity then to profit off of the stock price of the company that you're doing all this research from falling, why would you do it in the first place? Right? The fact of the matter is that regulatory bodies are not effective at preventing things like this. This is evidenced by the fact that some of the big frauds in recent history, like Enron and Bernie Madoff, information is sent to regulators on potential frauds all the time, and they don't have the resources in order to look into it and deal with it because the incentive system isn't built in like it is with a short seller. And the other thing that makes regulators ineffective at this is that there's no skin in the game. If they're wrong or they're right about a fraud, it doesn't matter to them. Whereas with a short seller, if they're wrong, they're screwed. Because if it comes out that the short seller report that they put out is itself full of fraudulent details and the company is actually a lot more solid than they're alleging, then the stock price is going to shoot right back up and their shorts are going to backfire on them. And so contrary to popular belief, systems that create frauds are systems with excess amounts of control on the system, like monopolies on money, like central banking. More regulation is completely ineffective. We need more freedom to do things like short selling. We should never get rid of that, or never ban that, never restrict that. And the more freedom allowed in a system will cause more risk for companies, and they won't be able to perpetrate this fraud like they do in today's current easy environment. And the last thing to note is that something like this happening is actually a big red flag, because we're living in a time period of the easiest monetary policy in history, largest monetary expansion in our lifetimes. And so something like Nikola right now is not so much an anomaly, but is likely an indication of more things like this to be unfolded. So choose your investments wisely, do your research, because over the next couple of months, couple of years, we're probably going to see a massive number of frauds like this unfold that will probably be even bigger and worse than Nikola. As always, I really appreciate you guys. If you want to see more videos like this, hit that like and subscribe button. You guys have a great day.